Thank you for that kind introduction, Dean Rolle. Why don't you just get out of the way, sit down, so we can all eat lunch, right? You know, that's it. So, good afternoon. This is my afternoon persona as opposed to morning, and so I'm here to represent my colleague, Dr. John Plateau. I am not John Plateau. John Plateau is, I'm taller than he is. We'll start there. But we are actually, quite seriously, the subject matter having to do with university government and business partnerships and minority women's business development model for New York. It's a case study. Is something that I'm actually quite involved with. Dr. Plateau and I go back literally over 30 years working on just these types of activities. When I served as Deputy Commissioner of what was then the New York State Department of Commerce, working with Dr. Plateau, who was in the legislature at the time, working as staff in the legislature, we helped put together New York State's first minority women's business program, one of the first in the country, and it was used by the United States government as a model for state agencies around the country. When David Dinkins became mayor in 1990, I was 1989. Excuse me. Dr. Plateau was his mayor's chief of staff, and I was commissioner of New York City's Department of Business Services, and we put together New York City's first minority women's business program, which was the largest municipally based MWBE program in the United States. And one of the reasons why we know we were doing a good job is that when Mayor Dinkins ran for re-election in 1993, his opponent, Rudolph Giuliani, who's now famous for being Donald Trump's lawyer, so not a lot needs to be said about that, but Rudolph Giuliani said the first thing he was going to do when he became mayor, if he was elected, was to dismantle the MWBE program because by favoring minorities and women, somehow that was disadvantaging the white citizens of New York. He was very good at division. He did win, and he did dismantle that particular program, which has since been reinstated. And so what we're going to, I just want to give you a little background in terms of how I wound up standing here, aside from just certainly trying to be helpful with my colleague. There's a few things that we wanted to talk about, and I'll just briefly mention these. There's even though this notion of minority women's business programs goes back literally over 50 years at this point in this country, going back to the 1970s and even actually late 69, Richard Nixon did a lot of things that we really don't want to talk about. But one of the good things that his program, that his presidency did, was institute this notion of trying to find ways to empower, first instance, black communities and communities of color economically. The civil rights are great. Civil rights are necessary. We are born, one could say, with certain civil rights and human rights that must be established and must be enforced. But there's an economic component to this as well, because you can have all the rights in the world, and if you have no access to the economy, if you have no access to business development, if you have no access to employment opportunities, the rights that you have really ring hollow. And so we've seen an effort by local governments, state governments, and certainly the federal government here in the United States to try to establish various initiatives to provide opportunities for minorities, as they're called here in the United States, people of non-white origin, as well as women, including women who are white, who have typically been disenfranchised or certainly distanced from the mainstream of this American economy. We can look at a number of examples in this regard, but one of the things that we wanted to talk about in this paper, and I'm not quite sure of my timing, but I know Dean Rolle will throw something at me when it's time for me to stop. But I believe we have about 10 minutes, is that right?
Yeah.
Boy, that look, I do not have 10 minutes.
Show got the time.
How much time do I have left?
How much time do you have?
About an hour?
No, six.
6 hours. Okay, fine. So we'll do one of those Fidel Castro speeches at this point. But quite seriously, let me use a term that's been used, I think, by Reverend Al Sharpton on occasion. Those of you who know of him, I'll use the 5 B's, which is be brief, brother, be brief. So we'll do that. What the paper that Dr. Plateau put together proposes is a public-private partnership involving Brooklyn, boroughs here in New York City, Brooklyn, Queens, and the New York City metropolitan area, bringing managerial and technical resources to existing networks to aid small business organizations, minority business organizations, and to incorporate the resources that we have at Medgar College, which of course is a predominantly black institution, and anchors the business school, of course, which Dean Rolle is the dean, and which I'm pleased to be a part of that school in the Department of Public Administration. The idea, of course, is that while there's not a lot, there's some things that government can do with respect to encouraging private sector organizations or companies to get involved with hiring more or engaging with more minority-owned businesses, not hiring, engaging and contracting with minority-owned businesses. The government itself represents a tremendous business resource. New York City has about $15 billion of contracting activity in the course of a year. That is not the entire budget of the city of New York, but we're taking away, obviously, things like wages. We're taking away public construction costs and like. We're talking about money procurement dollars. The city of New York, just like every municipality, every state government, and certainly the federal government, buys everything from paper to paper clips to automobiles and everything in between. And so there's a tremendous opportunity, and they contract this activity out with the private sector. But until very recently, the participation of minority-owned businesses in that, and women-owned businesses in that private sector has been limited, to say the least. Even as we speak right now, the participation of MWBE entities is about 5%. With New York State, which has which has contracted something like $9 billion over the last few years, we're seeing a 29% participation rate. So there is a lot of work to be done and a lot of opportunity with respect to getting minority and women-owned businesses involved. So what has been proposed at this point is to look at three things. I'll memorize the rest of the subject. But there's three things that are needed in terms of minority and women-owned business. Number one is access to capital. Number two is technical expertise. And number three, and as importantly, is business development opportunities. And the three have to be put together and combined. And if you think about it, of course, you understand why that would be the case. Because a business can see opportunities, for example, but if they don't have access to capital, because you need access to capital to pay your employees and provide the resources in order to access that contract, and you won't be able to be successful. Similarly, technical experience is important in terms of when you, and some of our speakers already pointed out, as businesses grow, the need for expertise becomes more important. A lot of businesses are one-man, one-woman operations with very less than 10 employees, and that is a certain skill set, Lord knows, that's needed to manage an operation that is small like that. But as it gets larger, there's other activities that are important. Compliance issues, for example, at the local, state, and federal level, and I know Ms. Roberson, you can bear me out on that in terms of how important it is to be skillful in that area, otherwise the other two areas won't work. And so what this is being proposed by Dr. Plateau is that a center be established involving the resources of New York City, the resources of New York State, the resources of a number of economic development organizations that are local to the Brooklyn, Queens, and New York City area to work on exactly those three areas in terms of access to capital, in terms of access to business opportunities, and providing technical assistance training so that people can move to the so-called next step, the next level in business development progress. And so the proposal that is contained in Dr. Plateau's paper is to take a lot of existing resources, a lot of existing opportunities, and to coordinate that entire process and using Medgar College and the School of Business, if you will, as the hub for this entire, and a center for this entire range of activity. We have to understand that if we're going to talk about real development in minority communities, certainly in this city, in this state, and in this country, the economic development aspect has got to be a key. When we look at the history, I'll just focus for a moment, the history of black Americans in this country, the fact that black Americans have so long been denied specific opportunities for economic development, and on an intentional basis. This is not accidental. It's not because Black Americans don't feel like owning businesses or Black Americans don't have an entrepreneurial initiative. It's because it's a matter of law, it's a matter of practice, it's a matter of tradition, it's a matter of custom in these United States, going back even before the end of slavery, and certainly even after slavery. There was a concerted notion to keep Black Americans out of any significant business activity. And people literally were killed. Black Americans were killed if they were successful, certainly in the South, and were disenfranchised in other parts of this country. So we understand that this is an important opportunity, and it holds true for people of color throughout the spectrum that we have here, and this rainbow spectrum that we have in the United States. And certainly it applies with respect to women as well. One of the things of white women as well. What we've seen with respect to white women, of course, is that, again, as a matter of law, as a matter of tradition, as a matter of custom, women really could not own business and not own property in these United States for a number of years. But even after the laws changed, even after the process allowed for that, we still see a very small number, a relatively small number of white women being able to succeed at significant levels, except in some very particularized industry situations, or as spouses, which is a whole other category, which doesn't, to my view, represent the type of opportunities that women should be able to access independent of any relationship with any man, certainly. So these are the things that this center is looking to do. It is innovative in the sense that it is combining the various resources, so we don't have reinvention of the wheel over and over again, but it's also looking to use these resources in a better way, in a more focused way. And the idea at the end of the day is that, and I know when I was in government, and also when I was working as a lawyer with clients, and we were saying, well, okay, what are the outcomes? Are they measurable? Are they measurable? Are the outcomes measurable? And here we're talking about measure in terms of the number of new contracts that are made available to individuals, the dollar amount with respect to those contracts, and were the contracts successfully completed, and then is there repeat business? It's kind of like rinse, wash, rinse, and repeat, and keep doing that and keep doing that, and we start seeing the kind of institutional achievement and the institutional change that's so needed, not only in this region, of course, but throughout this country. That's what Dr. Plateau said if he was here. So thank you. If there are any easy questions, I will take those with you. Actually,
I really don't have a question, but let me say thank you to former Mayor Dickens and to Dr. Plateau, who has decided to start this minority thing and make their efforts. Being a woman in business, when we started our business, we were introduced to the minority group, and it opened doors. Because if it didn't open doors for us, we weren't able to get bids in New York City. We stayed. So it's something wonderful, and I just want to say thank you for that. Any other questions?
Any other questions? Comments, bright ideas? Words of praise, I would say. Thank you very much.
MrDalamini, I come from the University of Cape Town in South Africa. So I'll be presenting a paper on the impact of perceived innovativeness, perceived risk, and perceived educational support on university students in terms of their entrepreneurial intention. So this is just my table of content of what I will present this afternoon. Just to jump straight into it, right? So to give you a bit of context, right? So this is what we see in the current state of unemployment in South Africa. So we're looking at a 26.7 rate of high. So there's a high unemployment in South Africa, right? So when you look at that, so obviously our economy is not growing as it should be rapidly, right? So we look at a growth that's obviously under 1%, right? And we come from almost a technical recession in the last year, in the last quarter of 2018. So there's a lot of issues around unemployment, and most of it you find that a lot of global companies are pulling out of South Africa, and there's a lot of job cuts in South Africa. So the economy is not doing as great, right? And then when you start to focus on the education sector, right, and specifically unemployed graduates, that's also becoming a critical thing, right? Because the way our state of curriculum is designed at the university level is not geared towards people taking up entrepreneurship, right? So it's training students to look for jobs in the private or public sector. So it's not geared towards increasing and improving entrepreneurship, right? So with this in context, the study, we wanted to understand what are the kind of factors that would drive entrepreneurship amongst university students in particular. So now when we look at it, so when we look at the actual gap, right, so most of the literature around entrepreneurship intention amongst students is obviously mostly coming from the Europe and the States, right, because there's a limited understanding in terms of how that manifests itself, especially in Africa, right? Also, there is a lot of discussions around students being the prospective potential people to help economies grow, right? Because when you think about it, in South Africa, students or the youth who are between 18 and 24 make up 47% of the population, right? When you increase that to 35, we look at 56% of the entire population. So South Africa is a very young country, right? Very young, youth-driven population. So we get towards understanding the role that the youth would play in improving the economy, right, and driving Africa's growth into the future. So this is what kind of gives us understanding of what would make a potential successful entrepreneur and understanding what kind of factors would drive that intention and behavior, right? So when you look at it, from most of the literature obviously has looked at motivations as what drives entrepreneurship, right? And some studies have looked at mostly engineering students as being the capitalists to driving entrepreneurship, right? So, but however, there are some factors that are seen to be more important and more significant in driving entrepreneurial change, right? So the three that have been identified by the literature is your educational support, perceived risk, and perceived innovativeness, right? So for the purpose of this study, we wanted to combine and see if we designed a model based on these three critical factors, what would be the leading factors that would drive that kind of behavior amongst students, right? So basically, there's a lack of literature around those three variables and how they also indicate and drive entrepreneurial intention, ultimately. So basically, we wanted to look at what factors would drive entrepreneurship among university students, right? So as I've mentioned in the previous literature, a lot of it comes from engineering as a critical area for entrepreneurship. So for this study, we were interested in more of the commerce, your business science students, and your law faculty, right? So we combined the biggest faculties from the University of Cape Town as being the key drivers of entrepreneurial intention. So basically, when we combined the actual model, this is what we came up with, right? So we looked at those three critical factors and how they would then impact on entrepreneurial intention. So naturally, these are our three hypotheses and how each factor would have a positive effect on entrepreneurial intention. So basically, our methodology was conclusive. So we used convenience sampling. So both of our students were from the University of Cape Town for convenience. And then we looked at our online survey, which we used Qualtrics. And then we looked at target respondents, right? So this number was based off existing and previous studies, right, as a standpoint for the amount of sample we wanted to use. And then based on that, we then split the respondents between the two groups. So we had 150 for law and 150 for commerce, so an equal split between the two. And then we looked at a 5-point Likert scale, and then obviously our scales were all adapted from other previous studies, right? So if we look at the result itself, so we looked at Smart PLS 3 to run our analysis, and then obviously we looked at the model fits, and we used the standardized mean square residual as a means to measure the strength of our model, and we looked at the normative fit index as well to drive and understand if our data actually fits the actual model, right? So based on these two key factors for model fit, they kind of map and meet the criteria of understanding a model fit in this particular study. And in terms of your Cronbach alpha, so reliability and validity with the AVE at the right at the end, so we are, in essence, meet the requirements, right, based on literature, right, because most literature would say 0.6 or 0.7 is the threshold. The same with AVE, we looked at 0.5 as being the minimum requirement and standard for understanding validity in terms of construct validity. So based on this criteria and results, our study kind of meets both from a reliability and validity standpoint. And we did, obviously, our hypothesis result testing. So as you can see, perceived educational support and perceived risk came out as the two leading factors, right? So which is pretty strange, considering that perceived innovativeness is a key driver. So we understood that for entrepreneurship to thrive, you kind of need people to be creative and innovative, right? So somehow that didn't come out as the leading factor. Somehow people were more drawn towards perceived risk as our key indicator, right? Because then it indicates that students need to be risk averse in order for them to drive entrepreneurship into entrepreneurial intention. And I basically found that from those two leading factors, it was consistent from other previous studies as well, that they found similar relationship to be the leading cause, right? Also, there are studies as well that have seen that perceived innovativeness hasn't directly have a relationship with entrepreneurial intention. And then based on that, we kind of argue that in order for entrepreneurship to thrive, we kind of need a very supportive and enabling culture, right? Because we need a culture that enables entrepreneurship. So if students are able to drive towards that kind of behavior, where students are able to be in the space where they're able to create innovative projects that would drive then the whole idea around changing curriculum to fit the purpose of entrepreneurship rather than the purpose of looking for employment. So we kind of project that, thinking about projects that are geared towards entrepreneurship will enable the kind of behavior, right? Because the behavior is about doing that will enable some form of action from students, right? Rather than them wanting to just look for jobs, but they're doing something substantial in creating kind of those projects linked to curriculum that drives some output, some action by the actual students. And in terms of limitation and future direction, so we just say that because obviously our study was limited to the actual university by default, then it's obviously the level of biasness, right? Because you're looking at not a generalizable sample to a bigger population of university students. And also by focusing on two faculties, there's also some limitation considering there are multiple other bigger faculties around that as well. And also looking at just three factors as being drivers of entrepreneurship also drive some limitation because there are multiple of other factors, as I've indicated down here, that also might stimulate or address certain limitations around entrepreneurship as well. Oh, there's one question there.
Yes, sir. And thank you for your presentation. In your research and study on this, how are you looking or defining entrepreneurial initiatives? So by that I mean, there's the traditional notion that I'm going to be an entrepreneur, I go start my business.
Right.
So there's a whole other range of thought in terms of entrepreneur. For example, lawyers go out and start their law practice and actually be very entrepreneurial. And in government and in corporate work as well, there's a lot of looking for, searching for people with entrepreneurial drive. But they're going to stay in a company, but they're going to be creative, they're going to be resourceful, they're going to be all those things that we talked about. So how do you differentiate those different iterations of entrepreneurship?
So I don't take away from that fact that you need, if in law, you need to do your articles at a law firm, right? So what we're saying that for us, we need to grow some SME environment, right? Well, that's going to be the drivers of entrepreneurship. So in our mind, we're saying that when you've got an established background or experience in some form of area, you still need to be able to function independently, right, from the public or private sector to drive that intention. So we're more looking at the behavior that would drive someone leaving a law firm to start their own private kind of sector in that kind of intention, right?
Sorry, establishing their own what?
So that driving the intention for them to leave a private or public sector to start up their own business, right?
Right.
So we look at that kind of intention for doing some business outside of the normal kind of public or public sector. So that's how we define the intention.
So you're not looking at it in terms of somebody stays in a corporation, but is very creative there. But
no.
Okay.
No. So we kind of build it on that kind of environment.
I understand. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, my question is, when I teach economics 101, we have the model of perfect competition, right? Many firms, what you do, what you guys generally do in you're trying to motivate more entrepreneurship or small businesses. But our economy, especially for the U.S. economy, small business is declining. And it's also true in many Western Europe and Japan. So will the small, this United States, around the United States here, you can barely see a mom and pop shop. Even lawyers, they work for corporations, large corporations, physicians. So we live in a corporate world with less and less competition. That's the reality that the economy we live in.
Yeah, that's true. But also, for us, we only understand.
South Africa, it's different. It's, but I mean, you go to airports, large corporation. You go to shopping mall, large corporation.
Yes.
So it's more monopolistic competition.
Correct. But most of the undocumented part of South Africa is that our economy is very formal, right? There's a lot of people trying to do and build businesses, right?
Right.
But the government is spending a lot of money and time and policy encouraging SME versus then global investment, right? Because they believe in the smaller businesses are the ones that are drive the economy and grow the economy, right? Because the existing companies are not growing at a large scale, so there's no growth in those kind of normal global companies. Hence, there's the drive for them to pull out and to cut jobs because there's no longer growth in that space. But the drive is now towards SMEs as an indicator of growth.
I will have the keynote afterwards, and everything that I leave out of here, I promise you I will try and make up. Yesterday, when you heard from the Kent State a person that did her presentation, she talked about the dichotomy between higher skilled labor and lower skilled labor and what it did to Akron, Ohio. My dear friends, that's just the beginning. All over the world, we see the substitution of low-skilled labor for automation, AI, and other technologies. And so what my collaborator, Jacqueline Kisoto out of Kenyatta University, she helps run the incubator at Kenyatta University. And we have been working together for about 3 or 4 years, looking at entrepreneurship because there is growth worldwide in the economy, but where it is not in the low-end skill, it's in the high-end entrepreneurs. 30 years ago, Amazon did not exist. Many of the wealth creators that are in entrepreneurship or started 20 years ago did not exist. And so a lot of the growth is there. But what we have not been able to do country by country is look at the growth, the global wealth creation in the countries. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this part of the session, some of the problems, set up the problem, and then in the keynote I will talk to you what we believe some of the solution is going to be. So I'm going to go right past this. Global wealth and income disparities. I'm going to show you worldwide what some of that is using the data that we've seen with the new report that came out end of last year, exploring options for increasing the utilization of global diverse talent, hope for the future of technology, and entrepreneurial innovations for the underserved, and that's what the keynote will be on after lunch. And unity in community and capacity building, and that's where we really think the hope is. We don't believe industry can do it by itself. We don't believe the academy can do it by itself. We believe that the community has to be engaged and involved. And then I will do very briefly conclusions. Okay, so the top 1% earners gain an increase twice of the bottom of 50%, and I'll talk more about that in the keynote. The report that I referenced, and I'm not going to go to it, it is hot link, but we don't have time. It's the 2018 World Report on Global Disparities. Please do Google it. That is for the first time in our history, we have the database where we can compare wealth, apples to apples, country to country, nation to nation. So the moderate income gains made by the 50%, but this is what was surprising in the report. The middle class is getting squeezed, and it's not so much getting squeezed by the bottom, it's getting squeezed by the top down. People who were in middle class before, they are becoming poor. Many of them, because of what you heard in Akron, Ohio yesterday, they lose jobs. Those low-end skilled jobs go away. I got 3 minutes? Oh, well, all right. Inequalities due to global increases, rises in wealth and inequalities, transfer of wealth. You look at the report and you see, but this is what is key. The projections for 2050, and we're already in 2020, for the U.S. is not good, meaning that many of the poor are going to get poor. Many in the middle class are going to get poor. And the folks that are really going to do well in the next economy are those who create businesses. Okay, so I went through this. I'm going to click through real fast. All right, here is the key finding of that report. You see the top 10% earners, income earners in Europe have 37% of the income. I want to go straight to the U.S. and Canada. The top 10% are driving almost 50%. Ladies and gentlemen, what that means is the rest of us at 90%, because you know I'm not in the top 10%, are living on 50%. Whatever is left over, that is what we're looking at if things remain the same. And as you can see, in Brazil it's worse, in the Middle East it's worse as well. So exploring options for increased talent, the educating the poor, we've been doing that for a while. I can do it in 2 minutes. We've been doing that for a while. It has not been that great. The reforms and new approaches need to be innovative. We've been looking at technology to help everyone, including the poor, and it just has not lifted us up. And encourage, engage, facilitate the business community, startups, nonprofits, and social enterprises. Some of that has been going on, but not enough. The one thing that I want to say here is there has been a substitution worldwide. We heard some about the capital and raising capital and the need for capital in the public sector. Well, what has happened is that before we had a lot of capital in the public sector, we are now finding it in the private sector. And a lot of that private sector funds is not doing the social work and the social good that it used to do before. So I'm going to talk about hope for the future in my keynote. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
What we thought at Medgar Evers College would be the right thing to do would to be able to craft a professional development program that will allow our students to be sustainable and have confidence when going into the workplace or into that interview. Statement of the problem. College freshmen and sophomores have a difficult time committing to a career choice because they lack the knowledge and experience necessary to make an educated decision concerning their career education. That's Gasser 2013. Presently at Medgar Evers College, we manifest a great need for cohesive career development and experiential learning initiatives which are geared towards the freshman and sophomore population so that a larger percentage of these students persist and obtain a career within a shorter time frame. Now, let me also say, this is not just something common to Medgar Evers. I also worked at another HBCU in Houston, Texas, called Texas Southern University, and we had a lot of the same challenges there. So we know that this is something that is pervasive in HBCU and PBI cultures. Significance of this study was to provide critical information to school officials and educational policymakers that social supports and career interventions are important early in diverse students' first and second year of college. Also, to develop appropriate career-driven co-curriculum and standards which would contribute positively to students' academic and career success outcomes. Now, let me say, I've only been with the university for about 7-8 months. We wanted to at least give you some information today. It's not the deep dive into data that we hope to do this summer, but we wanted to give you something at least based on satisfaction of students taking this program that we implemented at Medgar Evers College, the Student Workforce Development and Leadership Institute program. And so our null hypotheses for this program are: there will be no significant relationship and satisfaction as it relates to career program efficacy between freshmen and sophomores when controlling for gender. Hypothesis 2, there will be no significant relationship and satisfaction as it relates to career program efficacy between freshmen and sophomores when controlling for ethnicity. Again, we're only looking at satisfaction for this snapshot. And thus our research questions. Is there a significant relationship and satisfaction as it relates to career program efficacy between freshmen and sophomores when controlling for gender? And the same for ethnicity? So our variables for this study. We're looking at gender and ethnicity. The program is the SWADLI, the Student Workforce Development Leadership Institute. We want to know if our dependent variables were satisfied or not satisfied. Just real quick, clean, and to the point. Methodology. We're using a descriptive research design, which is a form of survey research used to better define an opinion, attitude, or behavior held by a group of people or on a given subject. Our population, Medgar Evers College. We studied 39 African American and 9 Hispanic students. The data collection, all participants were over the age of 18, so they signed student consent forms to participate. Program design. We employed the Student Workforce Development and Leadership Institute, SWADLI, platform as the vehicle to grow and prepare 48 MEC freshmen and sophomore students collectively for long-term career success. SWADLI is a program committed to fostering a community that provides academic, personal, career development, as well as engagement in community service, to your point, Dr. Mayor, to ensure college graduation, professional advancement, and civic responsibility. All of these things create a holistic person. They are all important to our students. Program design continued. This is more telling you exactly what the workshops focused on. The workshops began in September, and they ended actually April the 8th. And so we looked at a few different professional development areas. The topic 1, understanding your skills, interests, and abilities. 2, crafting your plan for success. 3, resume, cover letter writing, mock interviewing skills. 4, dressing for success. 5, team communication. 6, civic engagement, the value of community service. 7, the students had to participate in a service day group project. And 8, development of your career footprint. We felt like this takes students from A to Z in their career development process. And so we felt it very important to start with our basics, always wanted to start with our basics and kind of just develop up from there. Workshops were mandatory for these CUNY Service Corps participants, and they were about an hour and a half per month during common hours. There's one mandatory professional development workshop per month for 1.5 hours. Okay, frequency distribution of subjects by classification level. Again, we used freshmen and sophomores from this CUNY Service Corps program, and we did equal of both groups, 24 freshmen and 24 sophomores. Okay, gender, we had 26 female and 22 males. Ethnicity, we had 36 African American students and 9 Hispanic students. And this kind of shows you all three collectively together. African American female freshman 7, Hispanic female freshman 2, female sophomore African American 13, Hispanic female sophomore 4, African American male freshman 11, Hispanic male freshman 1, African American male sophomore 8, Hispanic male sophomore 2. And what we noticed was that African American female sophomore and African American male freshman were the largest of the groups. That was very interesting to us, largest of the group. So the sophomore female women, they got it, and the freshman African American men, they got it. They were the most motivated. So summary of satisfaction survey analysis between classification levels when controlling for gender. We found that African American and Hispanic male and female freshmen were satisfied 97% of the time. Now we didn't, right now, like I said, we haven't done a deep dive into data, so we just wanted to have something to present today. So we looked at the body as a whole. And so that's why we're looking at all of the male and female freshmen, African American, Hispanic, and not freshman female, sophomore male, female, that kind of thing. That will come later on. African American and Hispanic male and female freshmen, 3% were not satisfied. That's a pretty good ratio in my opinion. Okay. African American and Hispanic male and female sophomores, 94% were satisfied. African American and Hispanic male and female sophomores, 6% were not satisfied. Satisfaction surveys were administered at the end of each workshop module, right? We wanted to get that information fresh from the students, so we gave it to them at the end of the workshop modules. This is satisfaction on the workshops alone. We're just looking at that. Okay. Summary of satisfaction survey analysis between classification levels when controlling for ethnicity. African American and Hispanic freshmen, 99% were satisfied. Freshmen, very, very motivated group. African American and Hispanic freshmen, 1% not satisfied. African American and Hispanic sophomores, 98% satisfied. African American and Hispanic sophomores, 2% not satisfied. Again, we gave the surveys at the end of the modules. So summary of null hypothesis tested using descriptive research design or survey research. We reject gender hypothesis 1, we rejected. Ethnicity hypothesis 2, we reject. Findings. Hypothesis 1, the researcher rejected the null hypothesis that there will be no significant relationship and satisfaction as it relates to career program efficacy between freshmen and sophomores when controlling for gender. Hypothesis 2, rejected. The researcher rejected the null hypothesis that there will be no significant relationship and satisfaction as it relates to career program efficacy between freshmen and sophomores when controlling for ethnicity. Conclusions. Based on the findings of this investigation, the following conclusions were drawn. African American and Hispanic students should be encouraged to participate in professional development programs that will enable them to make more meaningful decisions about their career choices. With all other variables being equivalent, freshman and sophomore students have the same likelihood of finding satisfaction in career readiness programs when controlling for gender and ethnicity. There were really no significant differences in the likelihood that all groups would find satisfaction. Recommendations for educational administration. A follow-up study should be done to determine if ethnically diverse students participating in career readiness programs transition more frequently into internships than those who do not participate in these kinds of specific programs. It should be of interest to determine if career readiness programs have an influence on other ethnically diverse groups. The determination of any distinguishing characteristics could assist administrators, faculty, and staff in adequately meeting the needs of divergent populations. And lastly, a follow-up study should be performed to determine if programs with populations of more than 48 students experience similar outcomes as seen in this study. The end. Thank you. Thank you. Any questions?
Any questions?
Yes.
Did the students have any prior work experience?
That's a great question. No, these were freshmen and sophomore students that had no prior work experience. They were all placed in internship sites as well under this CUNY Service Corps program. So there were two components. They were placed in work sites, and then they had the professional development series, if you will. Thank you for that question. Yes, sir.
We don't know if they were first generation taking college, students entering, because sometimes that plays a factor.
That does play a factor. They were first generation college students, Dr. Mayer, from Medgar Evers College. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I love the presentation.
Thank you, sir. Yes.
I would love to know, again, what's the parameter for choosing just 48 that goal of the
You said from choosing what?
From choosing 48
Right.
students.
Right. They go through an arduous onboarding process. They have to do an application, write an essay, come in for an interview. So it's it's arduous. It's really intensive. It's as if they're actually going for a college graduate program or a position, a job.
To be captured in the work.
I'm sorry?
It's not to be captured in the work.
What do you mean?
Are you not supposed to reflect it? Looks as if it's just what you like. Good presentation.
No, I haven't done the deep dive yet because the program hasn't commenced yet.
It's ongoing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this is just a snapshot. Yeah, like I said, I'm just talking about satisfaction today. We're not talking about if any of these students transitioned into internships or any. See, that's the real meat of the matter, but we're not there yet.
I saw recommendations, so I would like
Right. Yeah. But these still could be used as recommendations even at this point. Yeah. But absolutely. Hopefully we'll be invited back next year to really talk about, whether these kids got onboarded, and yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Thank you.
One quick
Yes, Ms. Rock.
Quickly, are students compensated, or is there any financial compensation for their interning?
Absolutely. CUNY Service Corps receives $180,000 for 48 students. They get paid $15 an hour, and most of them work about 12 hours a week at their internship sites.